Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and on the channel I like to do a lot of Archetype videos for Arkham Horror the card game. What I mean by Archetype is a collection of cards that defines how your deck accomplishes the tasks that the game asks for you to do. In this one, we're going to talk about big money, where you get to buy your way past skill tests and pay for some powerful effects. Let's dive in. In order to have money, you have to make money. So the archetype we'll look at here relies on you being able to generate vast amounts of resources over the course of the game. But really, there are two types of big money decks in Arkham Horror. The Hoarding money deck, where you try to hold on to as much money as possible, usually about 15 to 20 resources, and the Spending money deck, where you spend the money as quickly as it comes in. Now there is some overlap between the decks. The Hoarding money deck does want to spend some of it from time to time, but which direction you go will determine which kind of payoff cards you want to get and how quickly you want to gain resources. In general, the Hoarding money archetype needs to rely on generating a lot of resources all at once at the beginning of the game in order for the payoff cards to be online, whereas the Spending money archetype needs to consistently generate smaller amounts of resources throughout the game. Now, money itself is pretty much role agnostic. Cleavers and fighters alike can make good use of it. Investigators falling into the flex role probably like it even more, because money can help you deal with whatever problem is the most urgent at any point in the game. Of course, money can't be your whole strategy. You still need the usual assortment of weapons and clue finding cards in your deck. Big money tends to help the most with passing skill tests and affording all of your cards. And it shouldn't be surprising, but this is primarily a rogue archetype. The payoff cards are for the most part all level 3 and above, but while we're mostly going to look at rogue cards today, there are some great resource generation cards and some nice payoffs in other classes too. We'll go ahead and start with the enablers for the archetype, that is, the cards that gain you resources. I'm limiting what we look at today to cards that can gain at least 2 resources at once. Again, there are some nice cards in the other classes, but we'll just focus on the rogue ones for now. First off is the basic emergency cash. 1 card, 1 action for 3 resources is a great return. You'll never be unhappy to see this, but if you can upgrade to Hot Streak level 4 or level 2 here, you'll be even happier. The disadvantage to either Hot Streak is that you need to have resources in your resource pool first, whereas emergency cash can start building up that stockpile if you've lost it all. Speaking of which, is big money still viable if you ended up getting paranoia as your basic weakness? Probably not if you're going for the hoarding resources archetype, because losing 15 to 20 resources is just crushing. But if you're planning on spending money anyways, gaining resources each turn will get you back where you want fairly quickly. This weakness, pay your due, is probably fine no matter what. Either you can afford to spend the actions or give up some resources. Unlike paranoia, this is an event, so you can play it when you want instead of immediately losing all of your resources. Okay, back to more events that gain you resources. Payday gains you resources for each action you performed this turn, and it's the last thing you can do on your turn. At 1 XP, this should get you 4 resources or more to be better than emergency cash. Faustian Bargain at 0 XP is already a lot better than emergency cash. 5 resources up front is huge, and you can share them around the table. The 2 curses sometimes matter, but most of the time they don't at all. What does matter is being able to play your cards, and Faustian Bargain gets you there very quickly. Finally, 21 or bust might net you 7 resources, which is amazing. While this is a fun card, you might be spending 2 resources in an action for the privilege of doing absolutely nothing. It's a good choice at level 0, especially in Underworld support decks, where you can take only 1 copy of each card, so it's really a second copy of emergency cash with some higher variance. Okay, more events. Cheat the System is an excellent card, as it's one of the few ways to make money without spending an action. Easy Mark doesn't look like much, except for when you start to chain 2 or 3 of them together. The card draw is a huge bonus too. Finally, Kicking the Hornet's Nest does a lot of things, but the money you gain is based on the enemy you end up spawning. As a part of the big money deck, you should try to get the biggest enemy that you can find, as long as you can deal with the problem too. Our last two cards in this section aren't events, but the first one sure cares about events. A lot of the strong resource gaining cards in the game, like the ones we just saw, are events, and playing them a second time with Double Double is amazing for big money. As we'll see later, a lot of the good payoff cards are also events, and playing them a second time is also very strong. Just a reminder, when you play an event the second time, you still have to pay its resource cost a second time. Finally, Watch This is a fun skill that lets you gamble away some of your resources in an attempt to get double the amount back. At its best, this is a fast emergency cash. Now let's check out some of the assets that gain you resources. On the first page, I've grouped together the assets that help you collect a lot of resources at once, especially at the beginning of the game, like Another Day, Another Dollar. This permanent card lets you begin the game with 2 additional resources, so it has a lot more worth the earlier you get it in the campaign. And you can get 2 copies of this card to start with 9 resources each game. Embezzled Treasure also lets you start the game with up to 5 more resources, provided you were able to stow enough resources on it at the end of the previous game. I think this fits pretty well into both archetypes, but is especially good in the Hoarding archetype, where you're likely to end up with excess resources towards the end of the game, and you want as many resources as you can to start the game with. Oh, and you can have 2 of these too. Finally, we have Unscrupulous Loan, which gives you a quick 10 resources whenever you play it. There's a bit of an anti-synergy with the Embezzled Treasure, but Unscrupulous Loan is certainly more reliable as long as you draw it. You can have 2 copies in your deck, but you can only play 1 per game. Next, we have what might be an okay level 0 version of Unscrupulous Loan. Investments it's okay if you have many other ways to gain resources, but in practice you always want the money earlier, not after 5 or 6 turns or more. Next, let's look at the Red Clock, both level 2 and level 5. These cards do a lot for you, especially in big money where the +3 or +4 skill value and extra actions really come in handy. But they also are some crazy resource generation cards. For the level 2 version, after your turn begins, you can either place 1 charge or take the charges as resources without getting any of the other benefits. At best, you could get 3 resources every 4 turns. For the level 5 version, the difference is that you can gain the charges as resources first, and then you place 1 charge to get the +4 skill value anyways. So you can gain 3 resources every 3 turns, or if you have no interest in the movement or additional actions, you can gain 1 resource and get +4 skill value for your next skill test every turn. Pretty great, but that's to be expected for 10 XP. Moving on to less exciting cards, we have 2 versions of Burglary. In both cases, you're testing your intellect skill value versus the shroud of your location in an effort to gain some resources. For level 0, it's a flat 3 resources. For level 2, it could be up to 5. Strangely, if you don't succeed by 1 on the level 2 version, you're worse off than the level 0 version. These cards aren't a bad way to keep gaining resources, since they are assets in play instead of events that go away, but the action and a skill test are going to make it feel bad more often than not. Next, there is a level 0 version of the Decorated Skull, but I like the level 3 one a lot more for big money. For 1 action, the ability to draw 3 cards and gain 3 resources is extremely useful. It does take up an accessory slot, and that hurts, but you should be able to get good value out of this, especially as a fighter. Some more assets. These are especially geared towards a drip economy, where you consistently gain 1 or 2 resources each turn. These cards are better in the spend resources archetype. Lone Wolf is an auto-include in solo, and is not too hard to play around in 2 or 3 player either. Gregory Gry is our second gambling card. Unlike Watch This, you do need to succeed by the number of resources that you bet. I find this one is better if you don't try to get all the money at once. It's better that you succeed by 1 or 2 than not at all. Finally, if you are evading enemies almost every turn, pickpocketing will gain you resources very consistently throughout the game, allowing you to pay for other effects. Finally, we have a few cards from the Scarlet Keys. Thieves' Kit, either version, allows you to profit off of investigating. With such a big card pool, I think cards like Thieves' Kit are a really nice way to replace an emergency cache in your deck. Essentially, you're turning that resource generation into another card that helps you do something else at the same time. Finally, we have Stylish Coat, which lets you gain an additional resource when you gain one or more resources from another player card effect during your turn. Well, what's another player card effect? Everything you've seen on these slides, of course. So now we'll move on to the payoff cards. That is the actual reason you're playing big money, rather than adding in cards that just help with being able to afford cards in general. First up is the Hoarding Money Archetype. At this point in the card pool, the payoff is the Black Fan and Well Connected, ideally both. These cards are extremely strong, so let's talk about them and what you need to do to get them online. For the Black Fan, you really need to have 15 resources for the extra action and probably 20 or more, as much as you can. The hand slot that this item takes up is a bit unfortunate, so your other hand needs to be a one-handed weapon or something like lockpicks or Thieves' Kit. Your other route is to focus more on playing events. Either way, you're playing this for the extra stats and the extra action, and you want those as soon as possible. Cards like Hot Streak and Unscrupulous Loan will help you get there. There's also the matter of finding the card itself, since you can only have one. Next, we have Well Connected, which gives you a boost to your skill value for every 5 resources you have, or every 4 for the level 3 version. This is a nice addition to most decks that have 10 or so resources lying around, but in big money decks, we're looking for these cards to give us +4 or +5 regularly. The reason is that rogues in general can be vulnerable to the encounter deck, especially tough willpower tests. Having a way to test at least 5 or 6 every single round is extremely valuable. For the level 3 version, we can even do this twice a round, provided we spend a few resources to ready Well Connected. With just these cards allowing us to pass almost any skill test, the rest of our deck can be used to play more powerful cards, and of course, plenty of resource generation. There are a few other cards that care about how many resources you have, though. Money Talks is kind of a souped up Well Connected, but it only works once. It's not a bad choice at level 0, though, while you're still building up your resource pool. Lastly, we have Dario El Amin, who cares about having 10 or more resources sitting around. He also gives you a way to gain resources. Not a bad card in conjunction with the Black Fan, but the ally slot is competitive. Cunning is a skill that gives you some more icons the more resources you have. This card is okay, but you're better off with Well Connected. The rest of the cards we'll look at fit more broadly into the spending money archetype. Again, even if you're hoarding money, you're likely to spend some of it most turns, and any of these cards are fine choices. The spending money archetype itself relies on you paying 2 to 4 resources most turns on the effects we'll see here, and it benefits from consistently being able to gain a few resources most turns. First up are the favors. These 3 are testless clues, evasion, and damage, and their costs scale up depending on how many clues or enemies you want to affect, or how far away the target location is. Avoiding tests is excellent for the rogues that have mediocre skill values, but can generate a lot of money. You can also buy your way out of the encounter deck with counter espionage. For 4 resources, you can draw one of your own cards instead of an encounter card, and for 6, you can help out a different investigator. All the favors can get pretty expensive, so you may consider purchasing Antiquary, one of the tri-class talents from Edge of the Earth, to help pay for them. Swift Reflexes buys you an action during anyone's turn that you can do anything with. Generally, your money is better spent with a testless effect, like 2 resources for 1 clue on Intel Report, but the flexibility here might be worth it. Next up are a few cards that help you pass tests. High Roller is another fun gambling themed card. Spend 3 resources for +2 skill value on a test. As long as you succeed, you'll get your money back. Fun fact, if you have Stylish Coat in play, you'll get a 4th resource too. Lucky Dice lets you pay 2 resources to keep redrawing tokens until you run out of money, pass a test, or hit an autofail. Neat effect, but since you can't cancel the autofail, you're better off using your money to pass the test outright. Let's look at a few of those. Rogues can spend their resources to boost any of the 4 skills pretty easily. There are multiple levels of Hard Knocks, Streetwise, and Moxie, but I've included the most ubiquitous ones here. If you have access to out-of-class cards, like the Talents, Physical Training, or Arcane Studies, those are also good outlets for spending money to pass skill tests. Now we're going to look at a slew of allies that want all of your money sent their way. They all include some nice action compression too. Their testless effects don't spend one of your actions either. Lola Santiago will buy you a clue, Delilah O'Rourke will do 1 or 2 damage to an enemy, and the rest of these allies have a sub-theme of spending exactly 1 resource for some effect. Joey the Rat here lets you play an item from your hand. His level 3 version also has the ability to gain some resources from items that you don't want anymore as well. Triggerman also lets you spend 1 resource, this time to resolve an ability on an attached illicit asset with a base skill value of 4. Hired Muscle and Treasure Hunter are very cheap allies that give you some soak and a skill value boost, but you'll need to spend 1 resource to keep them around at the end of the round. Finally, Lonnie Ritter has a 1 resource ability too. She'll heal damage from an item asset at your location, as well as horror from her own card. Moving on from allies, the Scarlet Keys introduce 2 more spend 1 resource cards, Friends in Low Places and Underworld Market, both of which let you add a card to your hand for 1 resource. One last thing, as a little bonus for investigators who have access to survivor cards, the Dark Horse archetype can match up nicely with the Spending Money archetype. Dark Horse is a card that gives you some skill boosts if you have no resources at all in your resource pool. Well, if you're spending a lot of your money anyways, why not just spend all of it for some extra benefit? You don't have to keep Dark Horse online all of the time, it's just a bonus in case you do run out of money. Regardless of whether or not you have Dark Horse in play, you might consider Fire Axe or Mariner's Compass. They also give you a way to funnel resources into helping pass a skill test, and a very strong reason to spend all of it. We'll go ahead and start our most likely investigators list with an investigator who can play all of those red cards. It's Preston Fairmont. Preston has 4 resources to play every turn thanks to his family inheritance. Now, because those resources aren't in his resource pool, he can play a Fire Axe and Mariner's Compass extremely well, and still afford to pay for many other effects. But he also can just move those resources into his resource pool and save up for the Black Fan and Well Connected. Preston can do a lot of things well, but with his low base skills, he needs to rely on his money one way or another. Next up is Jenny Barnes. While her skill values are higher than Preston's, all 3s is not very strong in Arkham Horror. She does generate an extra resource every round, which gives her the generation's consistency that leans towards the spending money archetype. She also has access to 5 level 0 cards from any class, which may help you decide which way you want to play her. Skids O'Toole is the original rogue, and his ability lets you spend resources to take an extra action every round. This leans him into playing the spending money archetype fairly well, but he doesn't have any built-in resource generation other than his Elder Sign. For a more interesting experience, you might want to try Parallel Skids O'Toole, who now has a built-in way to gamble his way into some resources every round. This is a very powerful ability, and a lot of fun too. Parallel Skids actually leans more into the Hoarding Money archetype, given that you can jump up to 15 or 20 resources very quickly. Next on our list is Safina Rousseau. Her playstyle is all about being able to repeat events, and since both resource generation and the spending money cards are generally events, Safina can do very well with big money, especially with double-double in play. Finally, we have our lone survivor. Well, Bob Jenkins is only a survivor at level 0, everything after that is Rogue. He's partly on this list because his weakness pushes him to play big money. The more resources he's hoarding, the less horror he'll have to take. As such, he's a good candidate for the Black Fan, and his item synergy is also a good fit for Joey the Rat. So those are our 5 recommendations for playing big money, but really you can play this archetype in any rogue investigator, since almost all of them can play all the cards we've seen. That's the end of this archetype guide. I hope you enjoyed looking at the cards and have some inspiration to play big money soon. It is a very strong archetype that enables other cards, like Succeed by X, as well. If you've had a good time with any investigators playing big money, tell us about those and those decks in the comments below. And feel free to check out some of my other Arkham Horror videos here on the channel. I'll see you in the next one.